guys, now we're going to start talking about our distance and midpoint formulas that we need in the course. Okay, so let's start this off. Here we go. Okay, distance and midpoint formulas. Okay, when you're given 2 points with coordinates, x and y coordinates, generally speaking, as x1, y1, x2, y2, then we have what's known as the midpoint coordinate formula, implying it is a coordinate. Is it another coordinate? It's given by adding the two x's together, dividing by 2, adding the two y's together, dividing by 2, making sure we separate them with a comma because they are coordinates. The distance is given by the formula of the square root. The difference of the two x coordinates subtracted, plus the difference of the two y coordinates subtracted, all underneath the square root. So we're going to run through an example. Okay, so here's our example. Here's the kind of way the problems are going to be asked of you. So for a segment with endpoint coordinate A at -5, 7 and B at 4, -2, determine the point C, which is the midpoint, and the distance AB. Now, nice, we have our sketch pad that can do that for us, and I simply went to graph and plotted the points A at -5, 7, B at 4, -2, and then I constructed a midpoint and right-click to find its midpoint coordinates. Again, midpoint coordinates, just the point that's midway between A and B, and also highlighted the segment and asked for the length or the measure of the length or the distance from A to B, which we found to be 1273. So we want to now execute those formulas and illustrate that we find the same thing. Okay, so here we remind you of the midpoint formula. Okay, and we remind you that when you're given the points, they're given in this form: x1, y1, x2, y2, and the formula is for another point. You're finding another point, whose coordinates are, as we said earlier, adding the two x values together, dividing by 2, adding the two y values together, dividing by 2. Okay, so here's the 2 points in question, same as we did on Sketchpad. Okay, and I very strongly suggest that what you do is you immediately tag them, as I did right here, labeling them x1, y1, x2, y2, so that when you put them into the formula, both the midpoint and the distance formula, you don't get confused which is which. So really, I strongly suggest you do that, okay? And I strongly suggest that every time you write down the formula, so that you can commit that to memory, because you really have to memorize these formulas. So here's our formula again, with the formula written and my points tagged as such here. I know exactly what's what. I put my points in. I watch my operations with my sign numbers. Use your calculator, please. Don't make mistakes here. It's very easy to make mistakes, but it's not. There's no reason to make mistakes. Okay. So having done that, we find that the coordinates, and I emphasize the coordinates of our midpoint, are -1/2, 5/2, but 5/2 of course is better recognized as 2.5. So the midpoint coordinate has an x value of -1/2, a y coordinate of 2.1/2, and that is the same as what we saw Sketchpad figured in the previous slide. Okay. Now we proceed with the distance formula. Okay, again, our points need to be of this form, and we need to commit this formula to memory, but if we write it down every time we use it, we will commit it to memory. Okay, again, as before, my emphasis is that you tag those points x1, y1, x2, y2, so that there's no confusion and you know exactly where to place them into the formula. Again, strongly suggesting that you write the formula down every time. That will help commit it to memory. Write it down every time. Distance equals the big square root. Everything's under the root. Differences of the x squared plus the differences of the y's squared. Okay? Write the formula down. Reference what number is x1, y1, x2, y2. Fill them in as shown here. Watch your operations. When you're subtracting sign numbers, it's the same as addition of the opposite. Okay? So if you want, you can alter this -5 minus 4 to -5 plus a -4. The 7 minus a -2 becomes 7 plus 2. What we get there is the square root of -9 squared and 9 squared, which summarizes over here as the square root of 81 plus 81. The square root of 162, my calculator will tell me, is 12.73. 12.73, okay? So you need to watch your sign numbers, and you need to watch your computation with your square root, and you should know certain numbers, and they're perfect squares. Like you should know the first 20 numbers and they're perfect squares. So for instance here, when I had to square 9, I knew it was 81. If I have to square 12, I'll know it's 144. 15 squared is 225. 18 squared is 324. Those numbers you really should know backwards and forwards, okay? So that's our distance and midpoint formula problems, okay? And that's it.